been there for the last 12 years, and is an expert on Sikh weaponry. It's particularly important for us here in Maidstone Museum because we have an extremely fine example of an artillery piece, which I hope after Neil's finished talking about, you can all go to the Regimental Museum to have a look at. It's one of two we have. The second one is, I think, actually in the Home Barracks in Canterbury.
No, it's now on display at Dover Castle.
At Dover Castle?
Yes.
We've got two of them. We can only squeeze one into the gallery, but we do have a matched pair. So without further ado, Neil Carr.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and it's a great pleasure to be here tonight. Talking about my favourite subject. A little over 10 years ago, I was doing some work for the Indian department at V&A, and we were then trying to find material related to the Sikh Wars for the exhibition which was to become Arts of the Sikh Kingdoms. And I approached the curator asking what I might do to help with this project, since I was only seconded for a short time. And she suggested that I canvass all the regimental museums that had associations with the campaigns of the Sikh Wars, and to see what was out there and what we might potentially use in exhibition. And what struck me from all of the correspondence that came back was some remarkable survivals, a handful, altogether about 20 cannon, which were captured during the Sikh Wars, which were brought back to the UK as military trophies, along with a host of captured standards and various ephemera to do with the campaigns and people who were involved. And seeing these cannon, the first ones I went to were at Woolwich, and we were just completely bowled over by the quality and the overall appearance of these things. But it was a very easy decision to include one of them in what was to become Arts of the Sea Kingdoms. But I soon hightailed it down here and saw the excellent example, which I will see later on, and saw its partner, which then at the time was in bits in Canterbury Barracks for want of a display site. And I was just struck by the sheer craftsmanship that went into their manufacture. I decided to try and find out more about them. And it soon became clear that artillery in the 19th century was one of the most potent symbols of the military power of the Sikh state in the Punjab. And from reading accounts of the people who fought against the Sikhs, it soon became apparent that they were held with great respect, and it was incumbent upon me to try and find out more, and this is what I've come up with so far. So they're very important elements, and importantly, right up until the early 20th century, the capture of the enemy's cannon was an important political statement, and the actual capability to produce cannon in great quantity was one of the benchmarks that various states used to measure themselves against. So the talk's going to be roughly in 4 parts. I'm going to talk about the capture and dispersal after the Sikh Wars, and then what we can learn from Sikh artillery development through documentary sources. And then I'll start by examining some of the surviving cannon, looking first at the ones produced traditionally in the Mughal tradition, which you'll see are quite different from the one in the other room. And then we'll move on to the ones following a more European tradition. We'll talk about suffrage guns. We'll focus on the Maidstone gun at the end. So, traditional warfare in the 18th century. The Sikhs were known for their hit-and-run tactics, their use of cavalry, the raiding. This was largely in response to predatory raids by Afghans and a whole sort of period. I think all in all there were something like 6 or 7 invasions by Afghans into northwest India in the 18th century. They weren't known for using cavalry, although they weren't known for using artillery, although they did use them occasionally in sieges. But this is a lovely old photograph which shows some of the cannon just deposited in Lahore fort in 1860. But what little artillery Sikhs did have at this period was light, it was mobile, and it tended to be on quite rough carriages, used for a single campaign, not designed to last, very efficient, at their job at the time, but not modern artillery as the Europeans might appreciate it. Now, if anyone's been to Lahore, you'll see this magnificent cannon outside in one of the public squares. This, popular tradition has it, was used during the Sikh Wars. In actual fact, it's a Mogul cannon, it's an 80-pounder. The barrel alone is about 14 feet long, and it was cast in the 1760s by Shah Durrani during, I think it's the 5th invasion of the Punjab. There's a magnificent example. It was cast in Lahore. It shows the Mogul tradition was in place in that part of the country. And it's on this magnificent three-wheeled carriage. You can see this is quite unusual. This is not a feature you find with European cannon. Quite an impressive piece. There's an interesting story about this. It's rather like C.S. Forester's novel, The Gun. This cannon became a sort of symbol of power and resistance and was used by successive regimes. And when Ranjit Singh took over Amritsar, he added this to his then quite small artillery train. And it was used in the siege of Multan, where it fired allegedly 5 times and caused a breach in the walls. But in doing so, the barrel was damaged and it was put into stately retirement outside the gates of Lahore and was moved into the city in the later 19th century. Now, the British really didn't have a clue. It's fair to say that their information on the Sikh kingdom that Maharaja Ranjit Singh set up was quite woefully inadequate. There's quite a famous exchange between Sir Hugh Gough and Sir Henry Harding, the Governor General then, saying they're good, they bring into the field a much larger force, they treble ours, they have much heavier metal, much larger guns. And our 6-pounders are pop guns, well and effective against infantry. But you can see that they simply believe that the Sikhs have much more effective, much more powerful artillery. And this was simply not the case. At the Battle of Firuzshah, Lord Gough continued with this assumption. He believed out of an estimated 100 Sikh guns, more than 40 were of battering calibre, siege guns in effect, not what you would expect in a field battle. And this is actually 3 times as many heavy guns as were captured in the entire campaign. So clearly he got his maths wrong. Something was different about these guns. It was causing confusion amongst British observers. And even Sir Henry Harding compared the battle at Firuzshah to something like Albuera, a massive, artillery exchange. And again, large, heavy guns were in operation. And they simply weren't. What were in action were quite functional, ordinary pieces, very much in the Napoleonic style. Most of them would have looked like this. And the man responsible was Maharaja Ranjit Singh. It was largely his personal vision and his drive that caused the creation of a modern artillery train to accompany massive reforms in the creation of a European army, European trained, European dressed, in order to basically police and hold on to the state that he carved out of Punjab and to hold it against all aggressors, now whether they be Afghans or whether they be the company, the East India Company, if needs be. So he clearly wanted a state and an army to protect that state. And in order to do so, he had to manufacture modern artillery. Among them was a select group. These became known as the Sutlej guns to Europeans after the campaign. You can see the Maidstone gun here. All in all, there are 8 Sutlej guns, as they're called. The one at Maidstone, its twin at Dover. One at Woolwich, and there's another one in store at Woolwich. There are a pair outside the barracks in Dublin, and one in a private collection in the United States now, and this one down at Fort Nelson near Portsmouth. So they're a small and a significant proportion simply because they are the most modern, most advanced designs that the Sikhs produced before the Sikh Wars. In all, after some bloody fighting, 256 cannon were captured. The entire field strength of the armies of the Sikhs, put into the field, were captured by the British. And that was quite significant. Basically, even 36 guns which were carried away in the Battle of Sprone were surrendered as part of a treaty stipulation after the end of hostilities. The entire field strength that faced the British was confiscated by the British in a blatant attempt to pull the teeth of the Sikh lion, if you like, to render them incapable of organised resistance with a modern army. Taking away the artillery was supposed to do that. However, 2 years later, the Sikhs managed to muster 100 other guns. Clearly, they didn't know exactly how many the Sikhs produced, and to this day we don't know exactly how many they produced. When the British authorities examined Govingar Fort in 1848, they found 50 guns, which were in the process of being excavated. They'd been hidden. And the Lahore Durbar had actually said that, oh, there's only one gun in the fort. So there was a conscious attempt to keep hold of the artillery. It was something to be treasured, something to be looked after, and something to be used. It's worth stressing that all of these guns that we see here today were used in battle. They may look pretty, but they were functional pieces, and they did the business. So all in all, ballpark figures, we think between 500 and 1,000 guns may have been in use. And this military legacy, the majority of it, was undoubtedly developed during Maharaja Ranjit Singh's reign, which is roughly between 1800 and his death in 1839. So, having captured 256 guns, what do you do with them? Well, the East India Company, in a carefully orchestrated PR exercise, transported them all over 1,200 miles to Calcutta. And at every staging post, they were saluted and they were shown off to the local population. The fighting on the Sutlej was so hard fought that there were serious rumours that the British were on the verge of defeat. So this was to forestall rumours that the British had actually lost the campaign. Now you see them here assembled at Mungir, which is about 250 miles from Calcutta. You'll see these massive cannon pulled by oxen, and camels and things like this. To my mind, that makes them look very ponderous and very slow. But bear in mind, this was the company transporting them 1,200 miles. They wouldn't have had the same equipment carrying them as they would have been used in battle. All the good horses would have been immediately appropriated by the company, as would all of the ammunition that they could have used. And on the 3rd of March in 1847, all of the guns were paraded outside Government House in Calcutta. We have a victorious march past here by the East India Company troops. We have the Governor-General and various company and British dignitaries receiving the salute. Various Indian dignitaries, including the recently deposed Amir of Sindh in the foreground. Obviously, this was a PR lesson. And in the background, you can see here a long line of all of the captured guns, including a slightly larger one here, which I'd like to point out. What happened after this parade is unclear. I suspect that the majority of these guns were actually marshalled and taken to the nearby brass foundry at Kosapur and melted down. It's quite possible that some of these pieces remain in India and Pakistan. Quite where, it's difficult to ascertain, because for the most part they would have looked very much like European guns. So a lot of further research needs to be done to account for them all. Among them was this monster, Fateh Jung, Conqueror. rather fanciful illustration, if I might say so. The wheels are a little oversized, as is the barrel, as you can see. But you can see it attracted much interest. It was a 38.5 pounder. The largest gun fielded by the Sikhs, but the only really large gun fielded by the Sikhs, it has to be said. If you compare this very much panders to the Victorian vision of Indian guns. They were supposed to be large, cumbersome, very prestigious, more for prestige and statements of prestige and power than for actual functionality. However, this is what Fatehjung actually looked like.
Yeah.
As you can see, very different. The wheels are only about 6 feet in diameter. It's not that much bigger. It's a much more functional workmanlike piece, again mounted on the three-wheel Indian carriage.
Yeah, that's a question.
Yes.
You say it's 38.5 pounder.
Yes, it would have
weight
fired.
of the ball?
That was the weight of the ball. It would have fired. Yes. So that was the largest gun we captured, and the oldest gun. Maharaja Ranjit Singh was actually quite a passionate collector of artillery, and it's quite clear that the development of artillery went through several different phases. Very early on, he wanted to get hold of as many guns as he could in as quick a space of time, quick as possible. So, many of these guns were trophies of his early expansion in Punjab, and apparently Sir Charles Metcalfe said that the Raja's attachment to his guns and his opinion of their weight are both so great that he would never miss an opportunity of obtaining a gun. If he learns that there's a gun in any fort, he cannot rest until he's taken the fort to get at the gun, or until the gun has been given to him to save the fort. He immediately dismounts the gun from the wall and drags it after him as an addition to his field train. That was in 1808. The price that Ranjit Singh demanded in mediating in a dispute between the Rani and Raja of Patiala was Karakan. That was the price he wanted. This was a 9 3/4 pounder, very prestigious gun, cast in 1761 in Sirhind, and that was used in the campaign, and it was captured by the British. This is what it looks like today in the Kila Mubarak in Patiala. And unfortunately the original carriage is completely rotted away, so all we're left with is the barrel. And you can see all the telltale decoration on it is in place here. And to this very cosmopolitan mix were added some imported Dutch and English guns, mostly iron guns that they had difficulty manufacturing, as well as a few Portuguese and French pieces just to add to the mix. Also among the captured guns, East India Company guns, no less. In various exchanges between the East India Company and Ranjit Singh during his lifetime, presentations of guns were made as diplomatic gifts. And these two were cast in Kosapur in 1838. Excuse me. They're actually howitzers, very modern, state-of-the-art technology, but as you can see they've been very impressively embellished as part of this presentation. And they include the Arms of the East India Company and the recently instituted Order of the Bright Star of the Punjab. Now, one of Maharaja Ranjit Singh's French military advisors was a French general, and he went on a tour of leave and returned with the Legion of Honour. And Ranjit Singh took a shine to this and said, we must all institute an order of similar calibre. And this was duly done. And as part of very elaborate diplomatic exchanges, these were created in the court and presented to various dignitaries, including members of the East India Company and the government. And this is one which is in the V&A's collections. You can see it quite clearly here. With a portrait of Ranjit Singh himself seated in the centre. Ironically, they were intended for a joint Anglo-Sikh expedition into Afghanistan, which didn't really happen. We had the disastrous campaign in Afghanistan, 1842. The Sikhs assisted with the retreat of the British troops, but their involvement was initially going to be much more pronounced. They were going to send troops into Afghanistan alongside the British, but through various diplomatic exchanges, it fell through. Negotiations fell through. These, ironically, were presented at Firozpur and were captured a few years later at the Battle of Firoz Shah, a few miles away. Fundamental to our understanding of Sikh guns is the work done by one Captain Ralph Smythe of the Bengal Artillery. Now, we don't know why, under what circumstances, but he basically looked at all of the guns lined up in Calcutta and did a folio of drawings. He weighed the guns, he measured them, he drew plans of the barrels, he drew these wonderful elevations of some of the more interesting guns. He even documented presentations by the company to various dignitaries connected with the campaign. And it's largely through his work that I've been able to identify some of the pieces that we have here today. This is one of the howitzers, which is currently on display in Dublin. So with all the data that he produced, and bear in mind he's doing it from a European point of view, we can make direct comparisons between the Sikh guns that were produced and their European counterparts, because they used all the same terminology. So he actually documented, let's see, 203 captured brass cannon, 33 brass howitzers, 5 mortars and 11 iron guns. And apparently they lost 4 guns on the way to Calcutta. They went AWOL, but we still don't know where they are. Now, anyone who's interested in the Sikh Wars may have read returns of captured guns made by the troops after each battle. Now, if you pull all that information together and you put it on a chart like this, the returns indicate that the captured guns were largely 6, 8 and 12 pounders. Now, 6 pounders are like the standard gun that you use in the field. 8s and 12s are slightly heavier. You do find them in heavier batteries. But you can see immediately that Smythe's findings, done at leisure, in great detail, completely contradict this information. Although the scale is slightly different, he records twice as many 6 pounders as the British observed at the time. Now, bear in mind, they're compiling these returns immediately after a battle. They just want, yes, yes, yes. Essentially, they're guessing. Oh, that looks like a 6 pounder. That looks like an 8 pounder. But unfortunately, most historians use the returns as the basis for all their studies on what the character of the Sikh artillery. They don't look at this more detailed, but slightly less well-known document. And it produces an entirely different picture. What we have here, 6 pounders, standard for a field army of a period, with a usual range of 8 to 12 pounders. And all of the weird, unusual guns, including our friend Fateh Jung, the largest, there's only one of him, and all of the unusual calibers that are recorded account for only a very small proportion of the guns. So returns are in fact educated guesswork, and if you follow those, you get a completely inaccurate picture as to what Sikh guns were actually like. Alongside all the detailed observations, Smythe also had all of the inscriptions on the cannon, beautifully recorded. And we're very fortunate that the regimental archives have a copy of this quite rare companion book in the archives. And the late Colonel Waring very kindly made these available for me to study. And I'm in the process of having 80-odd inscriptions, mostly in Persian, translated. And largely, they will tell you where and when and who for these guns were manufactured. It's crucial information to our understanding of how these pieces were produced. And there's only about half a dozen copies that I'm aware of that are in the country. But this is the only known inscription for the Maidstone gun and a handful of others. Smythe records it as Type 43. There are 12 of those captured during the First Sikh War, and the inscription records that it was manufactured in Lahore in 1838 on the orders of General Kushal Singh by an engineer named Buggy Khan. So we have this wonderful information about what these guns were like, who made them, and who they were made for. Among the inscriptions of some of the earliest guns to be mass-produced, types of which there are several present during the capture, mass-produced guns were being made in the early 1820s, and among the names mentioned is Chevalier General Claude Auguste Court, who was one of the French military advisors recruited by Ranjit Singh. Now, he came on the scene quite late, he came in 1827, and he didn't actually get really involved in training gunners and gun crew until about 1831. But he's mentioned in sort of 1825, 1827 as being involved in these manufacture of these guns. And from the inscriptions alone, we can tell that the same pattern was being produced in 2-3 foundries by a different set of engineers. So clearly they're gearing up, they're scaling up production, they're taking on European-style manufacturing methods. Not exclusively under European direction. This is happening before the majority of the European military advisors are being taken on. So this is an important step in industrialisation, and the Sikhs are doing it by themselves. And amongst the men mentioned is Lena Singh Majitia, something of a Renaissance man, a scientist and engineer. And the large spike you saw of the 6-pounders, the majority of those are one pattern. And from various inscriptions, we've been able to work out that it was the Surajmukhi series, the sunflower series. One of them is attributed to Lena Singh Majitia, and Baron Hugel, one of the various travellers who wandered in and out of the Punjab in the 1830s, attributed Surajmukhi, the designer Surajmukhi, to Lena Singh Majitia. So Sikh engineer is involved in the mass production of the largest quantity of cannon being produced in Punjab. So both, it's a fusion, if you like, of native technology and native expertise and European craftsmanship and European expertise coming together to create a modern artillery train. And if we just go back to some of the documentary evidence, you can see that all the important key stages are happening way before European advisors are happening. They're coming on the scene. So, as early as 1807, repairing and making cannon to start with. They even have, exploiting friendly relations with the East India Company, Ranjit Singh actually asks gently if he can have models of modern cannon sent to him for him to look at. And he then has these taken to these foundries and is used as a basis of the design of their own artillery. 1810, horse artillery. There's a visit by Colonel, I can never pronounce his name, Ochtlonely. Anyway, a visiting colonel presents some documents to Ranjit Singh, and he comes accompanied by a personal escort and 2 galloper guns. Ranjit Singh looks at these, thinks this is a good idea, and instructs Gopal Singh Jamardar and various others to design artillery along the same lines. In 1811, this is the Bengal horse artillery are starting to gear up to produce horse artillery guns. So these developments are happening alongside and very closely to the most up-to-date developments in artillery design being employed by the East India Company. And Liang Kadir Bach is even going to the East India Company workshops in Ludhiana. He comes back, he writes a book on gunnery and gun manufacture, which is now lost, but obviously, fundamentally studying European working practices. They import craftsmen, and by 1831, Ranjit Singh boasts that he has 100 horse artillery pieces. which is 30 odd more than the Bengal horse artillery are supposed to have had at that time. So I talked about this strong cannon manufacturing tradition, based largely in Lahore and Multan, the Mughal administrative centres of the region. This wonderful old postcard from about 1900 shows Zamzama, the thunderer, and you can see these wonderful decorative features. The sort of palmettes here, lifting rings, even dolphins. Wonderful features here. And you see them on a number of the surviving guns. Down at Fort Nelson, there's a very small gun. It's not much bigger than the one next door. This is a 7.5 pounder. It's quite a small one. But you can see it's almost a complete miniature version of Zamzama. It's got all of the various features. It's even got these lifting rings, which you only ever see on European guns of a very large size. They're to help lift the thing around. On something that scale, you don't need that. You stick a piece of timber up one end and a rope around the other, and you can sling it quite easily. It's not a difficult procedure. So there's obviously a conscious emulation of a grand design that had a prestige and a cachet all of its own. This piece, through an inscription, again by Smythe, we now know was produced in 1794 by Anup Singh, and that actually makes it the earliest gun manufactured by Sikh engineers in this country that we know about so far. So it's quite an important piece. This is a coloured version of Smythe's drawings in the British Library. And you can see the quality of them. And they record some interesting features. When I first looked at these, I thought, yeah, these are nice and colourful. But it's since come to light that this is the original paintwork. So we're in this wonderful sort of light sky blue, and this is probably red lead around all the metalwork. And these were presented at Addiscombe College, which is one of the East India Company's main military artillery engineering schools. Captain Smythe himself was a graduate of this school, where he learnt various languages, engineering, technical drawing, and a whole host of other skills which enabled him to help build canals, forts, you name it, for service out in India. Now, if you study these quite closely, they show all sorts of interesting technical information, such as these things here. Now, this is the elevating screw. This is used for winding the barrel up and down to aim. But unlike European guns, where there's usually some sort of ring cast on the barrel to help this happen, these seem to be attached around the ends. And you see this feature on the guns today. It's effectively a metal strap. So what we're showing here, he's showing details of how a Napoleonic-style carriage, very, very functional European carriage, is now taking quite an old cannon design. They're retrofitting. They're taking older gun barrels and they're mounting them on more modern carriages to help upgrade their artillery designs. So they're reusing stuff as well as manufacturing their own. Now these are the guns pretty much today. It's taken a few years ago now. They're a horrible battleship grey and black. Looking very unlovely. But if you look closely, you can see all this wonderful detailing again. So you can see the dolphins, you can see the palmettes, even down to the decoration on the trunnions, the pivoting points here. And they all show various differences in decoration. Unfortunately, these aren't dated, but they don't have the lifting rings. So it suggests that they should have been manufactured slightly later